I'm so excited for today's panel, and I'm honored that you decided to join us today because there's many interesting panelists from all over, and we have a diverse group, and we're going to be touching on diverse issues. So I'm really happy that you're here with us today. So to give you a little intro, while conversations about sexual harassment often happen in the public realm, as in on the streets or in other public areas, it's important to also focus on the workplace. Sexual harassment is a pervasive problem and that remains common practice in many institutions around the world. It's often underreported, and there is a valid fear of the victim being fired or demoted or feeling so uncomfortable that they often quit jobs that they need. And it's also important to remember that while this predominantly happens to women, it can also happen to men as well. So sexual harassment is not gender exclusive. And diving in even more, there's the question that often arises about homosexuality and whether a man can, sexually harass another man. So there's many complex issues, and so we're going to be diving in today, and it's going to be very exciting. So let me present our diverse panel. We have on my right Dr. Beverly Metcalf. She's a visiting professor at AUB in International Management from the University of Manchester. She has worked extensively in the Middle East and has published widely on women's empowerment and development. She has also undertaken consultancy assignments for Middle Eastern governments, especially in leadership development. On my left here is Mr. Milad Pournik, who is joining us here today from Los Angeles, so he came just for this conference. And he has been a policy analyst with the World Policy Analysis Center at UCLA since July 2016, working on the Discrimination at Work database, leading a project on youth migrant rights, and conducting outreach. Prior to this, Milad worked with the World Bank, USAID, and George Washington University on research relating to women's empowerment. And finally here we have Sarah Mallet, who's working in conjunction with Dr. Jad Melki, who is not currently with us, but if you see someone maybe running in towards the end or in the middle, then you'll know who he is. So he's running a bit late. Let me introduce him first. He is an associate professor of journalism and media studies and chairperson of the Department of Communication Arts at LAU, and the director of the Institute of Media Research and Training. His research is at the intersection of digital media literacy, media and war, gender studies, and focuses on Arab media and journalism education. And we have Sarah Mallet, who is just as talented and illustrious. She is an instructor with the Media Studies program at AUB and the Department of Communication Arts at LAU. And she is also an affiliated researcher at the Institute of Media Research and Training at LAU, focusing on gender-based research within the Lebanese news industry. So without further ado, I now pass over to Dr. Metcalf. Can everybody hear me? Do I need to use this?
Hi everybody, I'm so pleased to be here. Really, what I'm going to present is a theory piece, but hopefully it will make everybody think, and it's a different spin on sexual harassment because I'm trying to look at the roots of where it emanates from, and I'll be using some art pieces and illustrations to demonstrate my argument. Why space? Theories of sexual harassment are very much positioned within a global north framework, and they take many assumptions about women's identity within those particular places. And I want to really highlight today the importance of space is important to understanding women's identity and also their experiencing of sexual harassment. Now, I'm going to refer to a number of theorists who have written extensively about feminism and identity, and I want us to think about the idea of sexuate. And what I mean by sexuate is texts, whether they're words or pictures, or in interactions, we can sort of tease out the sexual dynamics of that in order to appreciate how sexual harassment is formed and what that means in different national contexts. And I'm going to be using bodies to illustrate how that is. In terms of thinking about sexual harassment, I want us to think that it can exist at the individual personal space level. It can also exist in an organisation, but also in the broader public sphere. And it's important because when we think about women's identities and bodies in the Middle East especially, or within Muslim majority nations, there's already a bit of a politicisation going on about body and dress in terms of whether they're hidden, they're in a no-go or haram place due to segregation. So, there's a geopolitical dynamic going on here. And I really want to explore those intersecting ideas of bodies and how we can think of them in national context and what that means for sexual harassment policy development. So let's take us back to a bit of history. Why do we want to think about sexual harassment? Well, let's think about women's bodies. They have been fundamental to understanding what a woman is, what she feels, what she does for thousands of years. Here we have a Venus figure from 35,000 years ago, and it represents many different meanings depending on which culture you come from and how you want to script or write on the body what that means. And some people have highlighted that this sort of fuller figure is associated with fertility and therefore it must be protected. But, there's a lot going on here, so we can't assume one interpretation. But very significantly, woman as body has been a defining aspect of what women do and how they're listened to and what they are able to do. And I'll just give another example, and this is by an artist called Auguste Klimt. His work is in the Tate Gallery, the modern Tate in London. And I want to draw your attention to a key difference here. In the figure on the picture on the left, he is representing the three stages of women's life. As a child giving birth, being a mother, and then in her later years, when she is, complete with her family responsibilities and also work responsibilities. What's fascinating about this, from 1912, Auguste Klimt cards are produced all the way around the world, but they don't have the picture of the woman who is of her later years. If you want to buy the Auguste Klimt card, you have to buy only the one with the baby and the mother. It's a dynamic and very powerful picture that makes us think bodies do matter, and looking at a withered and old body is probably not what many people want to do. I'm very interested in looking at the locale and looking at how different discourses and texts can be interpreted and how different discourses can either subjugate, elevate, problematize, or really cause problems for women and their bodies. And again, I'll emphasise the importance of hidden spaces and especially the geopolitical spaces in the Middle East. So if we think about the formation of sexual harassment policies around the world, it's very true that we've made major advancements in the global north in developing those policies, But a lot of that has been done through a process of volunteerism. There are many countries around the world where sexual harassment policies are not legalised or codified in any way. But also, why I'm interested in it, it sort of stopped, because in the stages of neoliberal capitalism, there is still a barrier. We are not moving to make those interventions in certain countries. Why? Why aren't we now able to say globally that sexual harassment is part of a legislative framework? It is not universal. And it's almost as though feminism has been done, it's passé, it's not relevant anymore. And when we think about sexual harassment, we need to appreciate the gender system or the social system, and we've highlighted in the previous panel about the importance of patriarchy and how that creates gendered hierarchies and frames women's identity and role of women and role of men in very, very key ways. But in essence, this gender system is perpetuated, and we still need to challenge it. Why do I think it's important? Well, let's have a look at the global political economy. Davos in January this year, they call it the Davos Man Conference, and it's the World Economic Forum, and it brings together all the leaders from business and politics throughout the world. And in 1997, The Economist in London called it the Davos Man Conference because it is principally men at that conference, and they're leading CAOs and leading experts with the World Bank. Why is it really important? Well, representations of women and sexual behaviour are rampant. We've got a president who's been inaugurated, and 5 times before he was actually in the seat, he was guilty of many accounts of sexual harassment and inappropriate sexual behaviours. We also have the parading of Putin and his commitment to this hegemonic masculinity ideal, and also to attacks against men, especially homosexual men, because they don't have homosexuals in Russia. So there is a big power system going on that is gelling around these ideas of bodies and sexualities and what you can and what you cannot do. And again, I'll mention neoliberal logics. Where are the challenges coming from this? Surveying bodies. This is a lovely phrase here from Kruger, an Italian artist, and I can't read it from that because I'm so short-sighted. So what does she say? She's really talking about the male gaze, which is very predominant in sociology and communication theory. But what she says, your gaze hits the side of my face. And I just wanted to show you this to illustrate how women are controlled by the look. They are always concerned about assessing and scrutinising their sexuality. Do I look right? Is this acceptable? Because the bodily capital is part of what is assessed. The way you do things with your body is assessed, and it has more negative consequences for women than it does for men. And also for men who do not live up to hegemonic masculinity ideals. So bodily capital is really key to constraints or potential opportunities. Let's have a look in the Middle East. Well, in the Middle East, women's bodies and identities and dress have been hijacked by Western media, and it has problematized women's bodies. It's problematized Islamic dress. It's even been part of the rationale for intervening in Iraq. So these are important issues to appreciate in the global political economy. Bodies and spaces do matter because having a body in one place and doing things with your body is not treated or interpreted in the same way. And I really want to emphasise the importance of multiple feminisms, and that's multiple Islamic feminisms. I don't want us to assume that I'm putting a Western lens or a Western frame as dominant. We've got to think of different framings, relevant and appropriate for each body space continuum. Oh, and I've got some pictures here of, you know, you've got Queen Rania, she's very diplomatic, she's sort of conservative, but she dresses West. Then you've got Sheikh Lubna al-Qasami, the foreign minister in the Emirates, and she's, you know, much more advanced, but she has got what some would feel dress that is disempowering her in some way. And then we've got a picture here at the Dubai horse race, where women are judging a woman who is not in Islamic dress. Why are bodies really important? Well, it was through the Bodies Collective, as they were called, in Boston in 1969. The Bodies Women's Collective, Boston Women's Collective, pioneered and were there at the beginning of first wave feminism, and they really led the way for expanding ideas about women's health and women's, basically taking a feminist issue for women's bodies. Absolutely major. Why am I interested in bodies? Because I want to draw on the writer called Judith Butler, and she's talking about body coalitions. She talks about body resistance and body movements. And, you know, I can envision we can look at a new way of theorising sexual harassment and social movements through a performative display of women as body, doing political action, doing demonstrations, doing social movements, and an active resistance. We should be reclaiming our bodies as well in the Middle East and articulating your own sense of identity, because that is what's relevant for your particular geopolitical space. Your body is a battleground. Again, a lovely print from Kruger. I've got a video. How do I start the video? If you just go down, you put it there. I don't think we'll be able to show all of this because. It's about women's bodies doing resistance, doing revolution. I'll let you have it, but it's it's a wonderful, moving picture. Writing through the body. Again, women's bodies have been important since the beginning of explaining, what a woman is, what she does. The aesthetic has always been favoured over the intellectual. And within women's writing and women's literature, this is articulated as writing through the body. And I am writing through the body. I am writing through the body in the Management Academy in the Arab Middle East. And I'm also writing through the body and talking through the body in a very, very politicised space in the Middle East. And really I want us to appreciate body diversity, body coalitions, and value that inclusive approach. But we should be looking at a mosaic in the global world, and we should value everybody's identity and all forms of feminism and all bodily actions. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. And thank you everyone for being here. Beverly mentioned Davos men. I feel like I'm at KIP women. But it's not very different. I see in Lebanon then compared to the States as well. You go to all these gender conferences and it's mostly women. But I want to just start by saying, so I basically have two goals here today. I have to make sure that you don't regret your decision of coming to this panel, which maybe my other co-panelists take care of. But also I just want to make you aware about some of our work and hopefully raise awareness about the general situation on sexual harassment throughout the Arab region and somewhat globally as well. So I'm going to start with this picture. We're focusing on discrimination and sexual harassment at work here, but you'll see this picture and you'll say, what is this guy doing? But I wanted to show this picture. It's from a blog from the World Bank from March of 2016. And it was highlighting the Mena Paradox, which I'm sure many of you are aware of, and I hope lots of you young women who are here studying now do not fall victim to this. But basically it's the idea that now the Mena has made tremendous progress in education, but we don't see this in labor force participation. So to try to understand why this is the case, there's been many studies, and there are many causes for this. But one of them is the legal environment. So today I want us to try to understand, well, what is the legal environment that is hindering the involvement of women in the labor force? And yeah, it's just generic title and my name and the date and everything for you guys. So, why do we focus on the law? Why do we think it's really powerful? We think that they enable rigorous techniques. We know that we already have a lot of outcomes related data, but we believe we don't have enough data on the laws and policies that exist. And if we have that, we believe we'll better be able to see what is important to moving the outcomes we do care about. Secondly, they're immediate levers leaders can move. Although they're not so immediate, as we know, we heard this morning about the draft law in Lebanon. 3 years ago, I believe they introduced it, so it's not so immediate always, but at least it's something that the government can act on rather than trying to change the outcome, which, takes more time. And this is a very important point, because when we talk about law, we recognize it's not sufficient, but we do think it is necessary. And that's why I'm inspired to be here, because it's great to see all the actors that are involved in, first of all, helping to pass laws, but in also in implementation and following through on the laws. So it's great to see all the activism and all the other speakers and all of you out here in the audience as well who are doing your part. And lastly, we believe that laws can help strengthen the work of civil society. They can use it for advocacy to say, look, you're the government, you've passed this law, we want to hold you accountable to it. Now, why do we at the World Policy Analysis, we're well placed to do this research because we have made this our work. We focus on laws and policies, and we try to take a quantitative approach to this. So I want to just briefly explain our approach, and then I'll go into some of our findings. So I'm proud to say now we have data on over 1,500 laws in 193 UN recognized countries. And with our partners, we go beyond collecting data on laws to also undertaking analysis of the effectiveness of these laws, to facilitating comparative studies, to informing the policy debates. We've spoken at the UN, we've spoken at the US Congress and other forums. And also, again, to advance accountability, as I mentioned, working with civil society to help advance accountability. So, what do we work on? And how do we select what we work on? So this is the general criteria. We try to focus on areas where there is research evidence that suggests that it is an important area, that laws can play an important role. Secondly, there's widespread global consensus. So for example, right now we are framing a lot of our work around the SDGs because this has been a globally agreed framework. And also areas where we don't know what works, but we have a causal theory which this could be linked to this. If we had the data, we could show that. And areas with a lack of global policy knowledge. So even with this criteria, you can see there can be many topics, and in fact, we do cover many topics. So I've put them up here. Some of them, obviously, we do more in-depth than others, but these are the general areas where we do work in. Now, how do we do this? So this picture, there's the girl in the front, she's doing the actual, what we call coding. The guy in the back is a bit like me, he works on outreach as well, so he's probably calling someone to share some of our work, to raise awareness around it. But basically, we look at the actual laws. We don't look at secondary sources, we look at primary national legal sources. And now, as you know, lots of the laws are in the local languages, so our team is quite multilingual, so we have, members that speak lots of different languages. But otherwise, we do try to get the official translations into English and work off of those. So we read the actual law, and we create a framework whereby 2 members of our team read the law, and then they have certain questions that they have to answer. And we call this process the coding process. And so 2 of our team members, they code a country by reading the law and answering the questions, and then they compare with each other and they reconcile, and they come to a final decision of what to put in the database, which will then be shown. I'll show you the results from. And again, there's quality checks involved to make sure that the data is accurate, it's checked, and there's various forms of making sure that the data is accurate. So let me get into what I hope that you're really interested in is, okay, that's great, you do this, now tell us what's going on in the world and specifically in the Arab region. So I want to present to you on 3 different policies that we have data for. So first is gender discrimination. So are there protections from you being discriminated against in the workplace based on your gender? Okay. Secondly, sexual harassment. Are there prohibitions from sexual harassment in the workplace? And lastly, the type of policies that support work-life balance, because we think that's an important part of the, if you want to get more women in the labor force, you need to facilitate the work-life balance, because we understand that they do have a heavy burden of the caregiving responsibilities, and it can be often hard to balance, especially when the policies are not supportive of that balance. So, first of all, very important piece that my team asked to convey. These are preliminary findings, so please, have them, but understand that they could change as we check our data. So you're the first ones getting your eyes on this. And I'm going to present to you of the 22 Arab League countries, by the way. So out of these 22 Arab League countries, 19, which is quite impressive, right? 19 have specific protections from discrimination based on gender in the workplace. Who are the laggards? We have Sudan and Saudi Arabia, which do not protect against gender. Surprising. And we have, so there's one more, which is Jordan, but it doesn't protect based on gender or sex, but it does protect on pregnancy. Okay. And this I'm going to go through because we try to understand gender a bit broader than just sex, so we also cover pregnancy, marital status, family status, and also in line with the WHO definition, we're also looking at sexual orientation and gender identity as well. But so that's the basic overview of the region. And then we try to get into more specific, well, what types of discrimination are they protected against in terms of gender? So this is the bar graph showing out of the 22 how many cover each. So broad means, is there a law that says you are protected based on the sex from any or all forms of discrimination. That's broad. So 14 out of the 22 have a broad protection. 8 specify in hiring you cannot be discriminated based on your gender. 8 in promotion, and the most out of all these is in compensation. So this could be equal pay for equal work, it could be equal pay for work of equal value, or it could be, as in Lebanon, just generally equal wages. And 8 are protected from protection against discrimination based on your gender. So the other dimensions I just want to briefly go through, I've mentioned these. So we cover pregnancy, marital status, family status, sexual orientation, and gender identity. And the result I did want to highlight is none of the Arab League countries do prohibit workplace discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. I can tell you globally also this is not as common as gender, but definitely it is out there. So the Arab region does stand out in terms of not even having one country that does protect on these grounds. So Lebanon, I'm sure you're all very familiar, but I just wanted to highlight the Lebanese labor code does protect against discrimination on the grounds of gender in hiring, promotion, and compensation. And it does protect against discrimination on the basis of pregnancy in terms of termination. So the questions I wanted to raise and learn from you, and perhaps we can discuss, is the actual general population aware of these protections? And even so, how did this legislation get to be passed? And how is it actually being implemented at the end of the day? Are women actually able to invoke the labor code, and have there been cases of actually using the labor code to protect their rights? Now into sexual harassment. This one, the question was, is sexual harassment explicitly prohibited at work? And perhaps not surprisingly, it is not the case in many of the Arab countries. Only 4 out of the 22 have a specific prohibition in the workplace. And I have the text of these in the appendix, so if we have time or if there's questions, we can bring up the text and you can see actually what they say. But what is notable is that all of them have been passed since 2000. So it's a relatively new phenomenon to include that. And Iraq has it since 2015, their labor code was a new labor code, and they have it as well. So the 4 countries are Comoros, Iraq, Libya, and Morocco. So Lebanon, as you know, there's no explicit prohibition, although it's great to hear that they are working on it, and I hope that they do manage to pass that. But questions here, have there been attempts? It was great, there clearly have been, and there are, so it's great that there's the activists on that front. And even though there is no actual law, so then what can they do? Anything? Are there any avenues open, any recourse for them? Lastly, I want to get to this leave policy because it is an important part of the puzzle. And it is something that we believe is very important in terms of women's economic empowerment and gender equality in the workplace. So this is some of our most developed data, and this is what the data that hopefully I've presented on discrimination at work. We will eventually turn it into a global map which will be color-coded and look really nice. And as you can see, it's really stark here, but you see that big country with the red is the great USA, right? And what does this show? It shows that we have neither parent has paid leave mandated by the government. So there's no paid maternity leave. I think there's about 3 or 4 other countries that are in this terrible category. But another thing to highlight from this map is that paternity leave is also greatly lacking. I know in Lebanon they do not have mandated paid paternity leave, and this is something we are trying to push. So you see all the yellow are countries where there's only paid leave for the mothers. But we believe that if you do offer fathers as well, it can also just change the norm and that, yeah, the dads do also have to care for the kids and try to push the envelope on that front. Secondly, we also realize that as kids grow, they have needs, and we need policies that support their needs as they grow. So we have different maps on, for example, this one up here is about if your child gets sick, can you get leave? And as you can see, there's many more red countries. There's much more work to be done on this front. And I know that Lebanon has neither for men or women. They don't get any leave for their children's health needs. So I want to end by just saying that we realize that, I hope that what you've gotten from this brief presentation is that, yes, there are many gaps, but there are also many stories of progress, and that it is not only the Arab region that has this particular problem, as I showed in the maternity leave lap, the USA is greatly lagging in some instances. And even in the Arab region, there are, for example, the 4 countries that have the prohibition. And so I just want to say that I hope that you've gotten that from this speech, but also in thinking about, okay, you have this data, but then what? And this is where I hope that this data can be useful to you wherever you sit. So we do try to reach different folks in terms of, and these are some of the ways we hope that our data can be useful for different, wherever you come from, if you're a citizen, if you're a researcher, if you're a CSO, if you're a policymaker, or if you're a funder. And I just want to end by saying that although there remains much work to be done, such conferences and such discussions give me cause for optimism that we can make progress, and we do realize laws are only the first step, so we realize implementation is an important part of this. And I just want to thank you, and I look forward to the question and answer, and here are my details, and we look forward to being in discussion if you're interested about our data. Thank you.
Milad, that was great.
Yes. Hello. Okay, so I'm presenting on behalf of myself and my colleague, Dr. Zadiguian. Over the past 18 months, we have surveyed 250 journalists across the news industry in Lebanon and conducted in-depth interviews with 26 news managers at various levels of the corporate news hierarchy. I am sharing with you today some of the results that have come out of this study in order to highlight the institutional barriers that continue to exist, as well as to propose recommendations for policy change in order to address the situation. So at present, 3 out of 4 university students enrolled in journalism, media studies, and mass communications programs in Lebanon are women. However, the ratio flips drastically when we look at the ratio of men to women working in the news industry. The gap increases as we move up the corporate hierarchy to the point that women's involvement in top management and governance are capped at 22% and 15% respectively. Women in governance have at best nominal power, so those 15% who are in governance have at best nominal power, and at worst perpetuate patriarchy and nepotism, as most are appointed by their male relatives or kin, and hold symbolic positions based on Lebanon's 1996 audiovisual law, which limits individual ownership within any, or shareholding within any individual media company at 10%. The limited number of women in management creates a situation where it remains difficult to challenge the traditionally macho newsroom culture, one in which gender discrimination and sexual harassment are rampant. So as you can see, 68% of the respondents responded that their supervisors are men. So it is a male-dominated industry in terms of management, which makes it very difficult to challenge gender discrimination and sexual harassment. Furthermore, these statistics have implications for the lack of gender equality and women's representation in Lebanese society as a whole, as it is at the level of governance and senior management where media agendas are set and who determine whether gender issues are covered at all, if women's rights are talked about, women's interests are discussed, how they are covered, and the overall portrayal of women in Lebanese media. In terms of gendered practices in the Lebanese news industry, 38% of women journalists that we surveyed have experienced gender discrimination at work. These practices range from being limited in the kind of work they are allowed to do, the kind of stories they are allowed to cover, dismissive or hostile responses from coworkers and superiors, to having their input and opinions ignored, and even being denied promotions or pay raises. Even more distressing are the statistics on sexual harassment. 2 out of 3 women journalists have experienced at least one form of sexual harassment, at least once, and 1 out of 10 have considered quitting their jobs or have quit their jobs due to sexual harassment. So it is quite pervasive. Contrary to popular belief, and even in some national studies that have been published in the past, the overwhelming majority of women journalists we spoke with believe that sexual harassment is a massive problem, calling sexual harassment endemic, systemic, and a daily nuisance that is often perpetuated by the very entities that are supposed to protect women from such threats, and often blaming the women themselves for having brought it upon themselves, that it's their fault. It's also important to keep in mind the demographics of women journalists in Lebanon. The vast majority are young and highly educated. Most of them are also unmarried and do not have any children. 67% have worked for less than 10 years in the news industry. On the contrary, male journalists in Lebanon tend to be older, are more likely to be married and have a family, and experience greater career longevity. This is certainly due in part to stubborn patriarchal societal norms and beliefs, namely that a woman's primary and most important role in Lebanese society is that of wife and mother, and that she is expected to leave the workforce at a certain point in order to devote all of her time and attention to her husband and family, usually around the age of 30 maximum, or maybe mid-30s, and that's why we see this stark contrast between very young female workforce in journalism versus older male demographics. However, these social norms are greatly exacerbated by the lack of clauses on gender equality and sexual harassment in the Lebanese labor law, as well as within news institutions' corporate policies. As you can see, the majority of respondents reported that their companies do not have policies against sexual harassment. Likewise, a vast majority do not have policies that support work-life balance, and an alarming 31% do not even have a policy on maternity leave, despite Lebanese law's mandate of 10 weeks. Given Lebanon's fiercely patriarchal society, one can safely argue that such a lack of policies disproportionately affects journalists who happen to be women. Our qualitative interviews with news managers revealed that women who exhibited tough or agentic leadership styles were perceived more negatively by their coworkers and employees, whereas men did not experience such pushback. Multiple male participants who have successfully climbed the corporate ladder actually admitted that being a man positively affects their career advancement in multiple ways. Furthermore, working mothers in the news industry lament what they refer to as the culpabilization of the working mother and workplace attitudes that being a mother is categorically opposed to being a successful journalist with the potential for career advancement in the Lebanese news industry. On the contrary, male journalists did not face such stigma and actually benefit from positive attitudes towards being a supportive husband and family man. So these next two slides show that regardless of gender, the overwhelming majority of the participants in our study, both female and male, agree that sexual harassment and gender discrimination are problems for female journalists in Lebanon, and that it is important to have specific corporate policies and laws in the penal code that address sexual harassment and gender discrimination. So this slide shows opinions in terms of sexual harassment. This slide shows opinions and attitudes towards laws for gender discrimination. So the majority of participants, regardless of gender, think that it's important. So clearly, if the workforce feels that way, there's some truth to be told there. At present, female journalists in Lebanon face a double-bind situation, working in an industry that remains heavily male-dominated and controlled, while simultaneously negotiating a patriarchal culture that trivializes women's work outside of the home. This situation is further exacerbated by systemic, endemic sexual harassment and gender discrimination that they face on a daily basis, both in the workplace and while reporting in the field. This is not to say that there aren't Lebanese women who do manage to navigate between the socially divergent roles of wife and mother on the one hand, and successful journalists on the other, or that every woman wants to take on both roles. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be doing better in terms of policies and laws to support the women who wish to be part of the news media workforce, regardless of the choices they make in their personal lives. On a broader societal level, the current situation in the news industry has broader implications for Lebanese society. As the prominent Arab feminist scholar Naomi Sa'ad argues, the number of women who hold positions of power and decision-making in media capacities is particularly salient because if the mass media form part of the apparatus through which particular gender roles and attributes are defined and assigned, it follows that the media is also a site for negotiating changes in those definitions. At present, we are caught in a vicious cycle that is self-perpetuating and desperately needs disrupting. So, how do we begin to disrupt this vicious cycle? We propose 3 distinct policy recommendations, some of which we've seen advancement in all 3 of these fields to different extents. First, we need to inject media and digital literacy, gender studies, and computer and data journalism and computer science into journalism curricula. Such interdisciplinary approaches can help better equip young men and women to successfully integrate and flourish within an industry that is one of the most mentally and physically demanding, especially at a time where journalism is witnessing massive global shifts due to the rise of the digital sphere. This is particularly important because there is a gender divide between men and women in terms of computer science, familiarity with digital skills, etc. The second recommendation is to develop institutional policies, to push for institutional policies, laws, and professional codes of conduct that will create a more equitable work environment for all genders, including family-friendly policies that support work-life balance. Thirdly, we need to remain committed to monitoring and researching gender discrimination, sexual harassment, as well as their implications on the news agenda and framing. I truly believe that once we start seeing more women behind the scenes in the news media and more strong women on TV and behind the camera, that we will start to see more changes in society as well. And the mass media is a critical part of society and reflects the kind of gender equality and the state of gender equality in the country. So I truly believe that this is a very important field that we need to address. Thank you.
We have time for a couple of questions. So, anybody have any questions? Q&A?
If you mentioned the talk about the body and the part that it plays, I'm curious, have you looked into specifically reconstructive surgery and cosmetic surgery and how it is being perceived? When we are, I've heard arguments that it is a part of reclaiming our bodies, and at the same time, it's being influenced by the bias towards how we're supposed to look and kind of reinforcing the stereotypes about women. So I'm curious if that's part of your study as well.
Is that working?
Yes.
That what I just presented, it was just really, it was a theory piece to stimulate. But yeah, I think you're right. Body modification, I would prefer to call it, is not just relevant for women though, it's relevant for men. I mean, in Brazil, they're all getting pec implants. The women are getting butt implants. And even in China, the women are getting butt implants. But it's all part of this this clinical gaze that is judging people who are not presenting a body that meets with our ideal imagery. And I think many men and women feel a sense of lack because they don't have it. And how you look does matter. Just a really, really crazy study that was done, but because there's quite a few guys here who've got beards, but in interview and selection processes, in America, men with beards don't go there. Crazy, that just something like that.
Can
I can give you loads of crazy examples.
I actually did my master's thesis on plastic surgery in Lebanon, and the economic and political and actually I looked at it from a sociological perspective, and beyond Lebanon being an image-based, a very image-obsessed culture, I also found that it was a way to exercise a certain level of control in a political and economic climate where there is, particularly for women, very little control. So whether it's in terms of increasing your chances at getting a good job, because the look is part of the job nowadays, or competing with other women for the increasingly shrinking resource that is the eligible bachelor, because we have a skewed gender demographic in Lebanon as well. So it was about increasing social capital beyond just wanting to look good, that it was almost a necessity.
Can I have access to
Absolutely.
that? Thank you.
I'll give you my email and you can...
That's great. Thank you so much. Any last questions? I know it's really cold in here and everyone's hungry. So thank you so much to the panelists. Thank you for coming today, to the audience, and I hope this was interesting. Please enjoy.